I've got to tell you, I was not able to be here last year for the first one of these because of work commitments. But one of the things that I did was I followed everyone that tweeted about TEDxCK. And I've got to tell you, in the years since then, I have met some of the most interesting people in my life. So first, thank you all for coming out to this. What a just wonderful, inspiring day this is. Now, TED, I think everyone here should know what that stands for. Technology, Entertainment, and Design. So today, I'm going to be talking about the T part. And I'm going to answer a question. What is your most personal possession? But before I do that, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a pop quiz. What is this? It's a license plate. And what is this? That's a VIN number from a vehicle. 17 digits, no I's, O's, or Q's, just in order to keep the confusion down. One more. What have I got circled there? Yeah, the serial number on a $20 bill. I always thought if you're a counterfeiter and you're not smart enough to understand that those have to be the same, you're probably not a very good counterfeiter. So what do all of these things have in common? A license plate, a VIN number, and a serial number. They are all unique. And this is a core concept whenever you're looking at filing something, is the idea of something that is unique. Because if you have a unique number, there's a few things that you can do with that, right? You can claim ownership. This license plate is mine. This VIN number is mine. You can register it with insurance, with the government, with anybody that you need to. Right? And by doing all of that, you get legitimacy of ownership, yes. And you can even register it for, say, warranty protection. We live in a world of databases. And this is the core concept about what I'm going to talk about here this afternoon. A world of databases. Now, often these databases, they come a little bit hidden because we don't realize. Every time we do a Google search, we're querying a database, right? And it's getting very, very difficult to know when we're actually doing that. The problem with databases is that they're excellent when you're dealing with unique data, like license plates and VIN numbers. But what happens when you throw duplicates or non-unique data at a database? Because that has happened. There have been duplicate license plates issued by mistake, even duplicate VIN numbers. Well, this is what happens when you feed bad data into a database that's expecting unique data, is you get chaos. Now, this all gets down to a really important concept in database design called data quality. And I don't think I need to define that. It's pretty self-explanatory. This means that you put good data in and you have methods of filtering bad data when it goes in. Now, some of these methods include the obvious, like training your workers to know and recognize what bad data is, auditing to make sure that the database quality is sound, even algorithms that could be built into the database to make sure that the data is correcting itself and flagging itself if it's not correct. And that all gets down to database validation. This is all really good when you're dealing with things, when you're dealing with license plates and VIN numbers and serial numbers. Because we can define what the format, if you will, of the serial number or the VIN number will be. But how about when you're dealing with people? Because lots of different organizations, government agencies, they also want to have databases of people. Now, how is it that we identify people, right? What is it that makes me, me, and you, you? Well, ultimately, the best way to identify a person is with our names, right? Now, this is interesting because, is there a John here? Is there a John? Or, maybe a Richard? Chances are there's a lot of different duplicates when you're talking about names. What I've done here is I've listed the top 15 surnames in North America. Chances are everyone here knows somebody that's got one of those surnames. Smith, Johnson, Williams, Brown, Jones, Miller, Davis. So these are probably the most common names in Canada overall, as well as in North America. In fact, when you kind of do the math and filter it all out, there are over 100,000 different surnames in use in North America. But if you were to just take the top 100 of that 100,000, almost 1 in 5 people would have a surname in that top group. So you can imagine if you're trying to structure a database to deal with people, you're certainly not going to deal with a lot of unique data. Now, how about first names if you're trying to build your database? Well, first names are kind of interesting. Surnames don't change, right? Usually the child would inherit the parent's surname. First names don't have that rule. Here's a list of the top male, 5 male, and the top 5 female surnames from the census in 1990. Chances are everybody knows somebody with one of these names. They are very common. And just as an aside, one of the really interesting things about this list of names is that almost, well, in 9 out of 10 of them, there are variants of those names that are very common, right? If your name is James, you're going to go by Jim. If your name is John, you could be Jonathan. Robert is Bob. Elizabeth, there's about 8 different versions of Elizabeth, right? Betty, Beth, Betsy. So people will be inconsistent when they're using their names, and a lot of times they won't even give you their actual first names. They'll give you another variant of that name. So now, jumping ahead to 2014, these are the most common names of babies born in 2014. Again, 5 male and 5 female. Chances are people that are, our age would have children, or certainly know people that have children that are named Liam, Noah, Benjamin. I think I know about 2/3 of the names on that list just from my own friends' children. So whenever you're dealing with a database full of names, you're automatically going to get a duplication, and you're automatically going to get confusion. And the thing is, lots of mistakes can happen because you're dealing with duplication and confusion. I didn't have to look very hard when I found this online a couple of weeks ago. It's an awful, awful story, but this happened just outside of Detroit. There was a gentleman went to, he had purchased, when his wife passed away, a joint grave, one for her and then next to hers, one for him when he died. And he went to visit his wife, and he found out that unfortunately they had made a mistake, and the cemetery had accidentally buried another person with the exact same name right next to his wife. So needless to say, he was not very happy about that. But this is the sort of mistake that can slip through the cracks when you're dealing with databases full of names. So exactly who is it that would be interested in maintaining a database of people's names? Well, first one that would come to mind would be the government. The police certainly have an extensive database of names, also Customs and Immigration as well. Plus, OHIP, the hospitals, they would all have indexes of names as well. And even if you're issued like a secondary number, they would still rely primarily on your name to identify you. Government documents such as driver's licenses. Now, when you're dealing with the government, a lot of times you'll trust them a little bit more than when you're dealing with a corporation. So it's not unusual for the police to ask you your date of birth, and that is just to separate the 48-year-old Brian French from the 28-year-old Brian French. I'm the 48-year-old, by the way. And also, you might be asked to record your height or weight. If you're ever arrested, you're going to be asked to have your scars or your tattoos photographed. Just, additional data quality measures to make sure that they get it right, that you're not mistaken for somebody else. Also with the address. So when you're dealing with the government, you've got your highest expectation of privacy. And the reason for that is because with the government, the access to that data is strictly controlled by laws and regulations. What's the next level down in databases? Right? Commercial databases. Everybody's familiar with these. These would include things like your air miles plan. Points clubs. Ever go to Shoppers Drug Mart and you're asked if you've got your Optimum card? Right? They're not doing that to be nice to you. They're doing that because they're collecting information on the purchases that you're making and when you're making them. Costco's interesting because they will actually get detailed information on your employer as part of the membership process. So they'll be able to take a certain employer and they'll be able to get all of the employees that are Costco members and send target mailings to them. Same with banks and credit card companies. Now here's one most people don't think of as a massive database, but this is actually one of the biggest databases, one of the biggest commercial databases going right now. And I bet every night a lot of us add information into this database simply by watching Netflix. Again, they just announced last week 60 million subscribers. That's 60 million people building up a massive library of taste preferences for TV shows and movies and everything else that they offer on Netflix, including the complete TEDx library. Now, the thing with this is that you've got a reasonable expectation of privacy when you're dealing with commercial databases, commercial companies. And that's because it's only accessible by authorized employees. Now let's go to the third and sort of the lowest rung of this, but that would be databases maintained on the internet. It's kind of a free-for-all on the internet, but when you take a look at the types of data that we're feeding into the internet all the time, that would include emails, chats. If you're using iCloud or Dropbox, right, any of those cloud services, you're uploading your photos, maybe even your videos, your music. Everyone uses online banking now, so that is all going into a big database, as well as your web history, which, surprisingly can contain some very personal things about the things that you're looking at online. Now, in a lot of cases, all you need to get access to internet databases are email addresses. And if you're lucky, maybe they're going to validate you with an SMS message too. And the rest is up to you, the security measures such as firewall and encryption. So really the internet is the wild west of database privacy right now. And the access is limited only by your own precautions that you take. Has anybody here ever Googled yourself? I would hope so. Right? It's amazing what you can find out about yourself or people that share your same name. And Google is really cool because Google has the ability to reach into social media. It reaches into public forums if you're posting on a website, mentions and tags on Facebook, yours or those by others, as well as your general presence on the web. And it's very difficult for someone to access the internet without leaving a footprint in the internet's many interconnected databases. So why would you worry about that? Well, it's accessible to everybody. So if you're applying for a job, next time around, don't be surprised if they Google you and do a little bit of digging based on your web presence. It's the same with volunteering too. People want to know who they're dealing with and what your background is before they hire you or give you a volunteer position. Relationships. Has anybody ever Googled a blind date just to see what they were up to? Certainly. And you always hear stories about people getting stopped at customs when they're trying to cross the border because they tweeted something stupid 5 years ago, or they made they favorited somebody on Facebook that ended up being someone with a negative background. Just within the last couple of weeks, somebody tweeted something mean about an airline and wasn't allowed to get on the plane. So that's the sort of impact that this can have. So in 2015, you are your Google searches. This is something that's really important to keep in mind because, again, Google is one big database. I Googled myself. I do that from time to time. And here, Brian French was involved in a fatal motor vehicle collision just outside of London. This was not me, but I would expect that if I was ever applying for something, this would come up. Now, because of this, Brian is a very common name. French is a very common surname. One of the things that I've decided to do is whenever I am using anything professionally, I put my middle initial in there. Because there's lots of Brian Frenches out there that are idiots, but there aren't too many Brian K. Frenches out there. That is enough in a database, in a Google search, to separate me from everybody else. So it's something that I would encourage you to at least think about. One last concept that I want to talk about is the idea of links or linkages between databases. Now, it's one thing to have your Shoppers Drug Mart Optimum database separate from your Google database, separate from everything else, but when you start getting these databases linked together, that's when you can really draw a lot of information out of something. And actually one of the most common, or actually one of the most popular, Excel add-ons right now is something called Power Pivot. And what Power Pivot allows you to do is import disparate databases into Excel. It will find commonalities such as an email address, and then it will sort all of these databases together into one big database. And all it needs is a phone number or an email address to merge all of these things together. So suddenly, instead of dealing with 6 different ones, you're now dealing with one big one. And it's kind of scary when tasks like that get automated. So just a couple of take-homes, if I may. Things you need to be aware of, and this is especially true for everybody that's navigating the internet on a regular basis. Be aware of the consequences of providing personal information. Typically, this would be filling out forms on the internet. This would also include things like even door-to-door solicitors. Be aware that anytime you give anybody personal information, this is going to go into somebody's database. Not necessarily a bad thing, but when you think of it in that way, it looks a little bit different. Secondary to that, be aware of your right to refuse to provide information. When somebody asks you for something, you can say no, I don't have to do that. Be aware of privacy policies and regulations. Governments have them, corporations have them, and it's almost like those user agreements that you have to click I accept. Nobody ever reads them, but they are there, and it's something that you need to be aware of because, again, when the world is one big database and you're an entry in that database, that's what you are. Be aware of FIPA disclosure request rights, the Freedom of Information and Personal Privacy Act. This is a provincial act here in Ontario that allows you to make requests for data held by the provincial government. And that could include hospitals, it could even include the police. So most people aren't aware that if you want to know what is on your hospital chart, there is a method defined for finding that out. Be aware of enhancement options to increase your privacy online. Most of the time when you sign up for a website, that website does not default to the highest privacy settings. You can usually go in and increase that, and actually in many cases, such as with Facebook, it's fairly low unless you go in and you actually change it. And finally, be aware of scams and frauds, phishing attempts, which is where someone tries to get you to provide personal information by lying about who they are and what they're looking for, especially for elderly victims. A couple of nights ago, actually it was just last night, I guess, a couple of nights ago, I had dinner in Blenheim at the Rotary Club Fish Fry, and I was talking to a stranger next to me who heard that I was involved in computers. And he said, oh, I had the nicest call from Microsoft this morning. And that man spent 3 hours inside my computer fixing it. And then he said, and you know what? After he was done, his boss called and wanted to make sure that he did it right. So then he went inside the computer, and then his boss's boss called. And I said, buddy, I'm sorry, but you better watch your bank accounts and your credit cards really closely, because I suspect you're going to find a lot less money in there than you thought. So keep aware of this, especially for elderly people that are more trusting. So to answer my initial question today, your name is your most personal possession. Please always handle it with care. Thank you.